Like that fear of being average, it's like, that's a hell of a motivator. It can also wreck your fucking life. So I'm going to kick it off by just talking about the post that you made, which, yeah, did get a lot of engagement. But you said fear, it has the capability to drive us either towards a positive or negative outcome. How are you controlling the fear to your advantage? Do you believe that fear can be a primary driver of accomplishment? And so this is interesting because it looks like you had a ton of comments and you were commenting back and had a bunch of DMs about this. I don't know. Well, first of all, what was it that made you start wondering about this idea of fear and the role it plays in our lives?
That's actually really funny, dude. I was traveling back from the East Coast just because of the East Coast just got a whole bunch of snow, whatever else. So I'm trying to make it back here due to the fact that
you were scared of the snow.
Exactly, right. I was scared of the snow, but really what it came down to was the fact that I had told my daughter's mother that I'll be back Tuesday so that I can pick her up from school. And when it came down to one of the things, like, it just aligned with kind of where my purpose was at in life of like, hey, the goal is to be the best father possible.
Yeah.
And I said I was going to do something. I need to make sure I fulfill and do it. Let me go ahead and make sure I go ahead and get myself in the best position possible to make that happen. Mm-hmm. And it was funny because it was like 2:00 in the afternoon on a Monday. I got an email saying, hey, your flight might be delayed Tuesday morning due to weather problems. So we're giving you guys a free weather waiver to go ahead and fly back early. And I was like, well, all right, cool. Let me go and check this out. I was like, well, let me go see what the flights look like today. Like, it cleared up. Like, there's a window right now. There's a weather window right now to where planes are flying. Right now, but let me see what happens. So I ended up looking for the next flight out of North Carolina that night on Monday.
Yeah.
And ended up getting delayed 4 hours. So I didn't fly out of North Carolina until like 10 o'clock at night. Flew into Atlanta, got into Atlanta about 11:30. And ended up getting a hotel room real quick. Got a hotel room, spent the $80 real fast just to get at least a decent night of sleep. But for my travel, I knew I was going to be busy the next day. And I only got 4 hours of sleep, maybe. 4 hours of sleep because I had to be back at the airport by 6 and ready to take off my flight.
Yep.
And as I'm walking through the airport, as I've gotten through security, I started thinking about like the things that we do so that we can go ahead and get things accomplished, right? And it kind of started thinking in my head, it was like, why did I just put myself through all this? Why did I go ahead, decide to come sit at the airport, wait 4 hours for this delay, and then from there I decided to get in late into Atlanta. Instead of sleeping in the airport, I decided I wanted something to like help with having a better day the following day. So again, I'm not in that mindset where I got to suffer right now, right?
Yeah.
Like we take the small things for granted sometimes, and one of those things was like, all right, cool, I'm gonna go get somewhere to sleep. But the real reason I was like, man, why did I want to fly back? Why did I need to fly back? And I started thinking about it. I was like, well, like I could have stayed back in North Carolina, got work done, did all this other stuff. But I've been gone already like 6 days. Like, I haven't seen my daughter. I was like, I need to get, I said these things for her, that's what I was going to do. And especially with her mother, her mom's super busy. And I was like, all right, cool. What ended up coming down was the fear of letting down my daughter. Mm-hmm. Right? Like I said, I'll be back on Tuesday. I want to go ahead and do what I need to do. So I decided to go ahead and put myself in a position to go ahead and I'll just go ahead and sacrifice a little bit, i.e. sleep, and do whatever I need to do. Luckily, I didn't spend extra money just because of the fact of whatever else, just because of the weather waiver. And it came down to that, dude. I was just like, man, like, why am I driven to do this? And it was like, well, what is one of my fears of something? If there's a fear of something, right? There's something that's making me afraid to motivate me to do this. I didn't care if like, A, B, C, D of like staying there on Tuesday and being there all day, or getting delayed and then not getting there in time to pick her up. It was all those things. And I thought about the whole situation as a whole, right? I was like, okay, I'm right here, the whole situation now. And I was like, well, what are the factors and what are the drivers that are making me do this? And fear was one of them, like I mentioned.
Yeah. And
I was like, and I started thinking about I was sitting down there waiting before we boarded. And I started thinking, I was like, man, I can think about things like in my past, like over the past, and I just had a dope podcast that we did with the Softly Performance podcast.
Oh, cool.
That really got like you thinking, like it's a good one, like it's gonna make you think. I really got into the heads of talking about like what really craves our drive and need that makes us have these behaviors, and how are we looking at the new year, and are we gonna look at the new year as a New Year's resolution, or are we gonna look at the new year as how can I take away all the negatives that I had in my year before? What were the actions that led to them? And how can I make them not happen in 2019? Because everything else in 2019 were going well, right? And like the whole idea, you mentioned it too, right? You're talking about thinking, right? We want to think to be better. We need to have to think to change. The same thing here, right? I need to think back and look at, okay, what behaviors and drivers made me have these negative outcomes, and how can I control them? So it came down to like just kind of that whole time thinking wise, and it was really cool. I was like, all right, cool. Let's go and see what everyone else thinks. Like, you know, like everyone, I started thinking about, everyone talks about being motivated. Everyone talks about like, oh, look at me, I'm super fucking strong and I'm motivated. And you're like, that's cool, bro. But like, there's some underlying byproduct for you to be doing that. And I want to know what it is. Who's going to talk about it? Right? Like, and the really cool part was the conversations that I had with everyone on there. Like you read them, dude, and everyone's just being super open about like, yes, I let fear be one of my drivers. It might not be a primary, but it is a driver that's among this like shelf of drivers leading you to your purpose, your goal, whatever you want it to be. And I was like, super powerful to understand that, like, yeah, of course, fear is gonna be a powerful driver, right? Like we know that's common sense. Like that's just what it is. But realistically, like no one ever really thinks about like what's the underlying factor and why that fear is there, right? Like that is kind of where I went with that. And I was just like, all right, cool. And having these people kind of like, and everyone that follows me, it was really cool to hear people's outlooks and like, yeah, fear does this. Fear has made me become a better person.
Yeah.
And you hear that and you're like, man, such a negative word that people look at has had such a positive impact on people.
Yeah. Yeah, that is weird how, I mean, fear, it's got a negative connotation. We automatically think about it controlling our lives in the worst way. Even me, like when I read that post, even I literally went to thinking about fear, how negative it is. What's interesting is if I think back at some of the like more, even like going through a selection and stuff like that in the military, it was like the fear of failure was so fucking real. Like, and so that's interesting. Like fear is this thing that can run your life in the worst way, or could be leveraged in order to make your life better, to enhance your life.
Yeah, dude, and it was weird because of the fact that like when you go and look at like what fear is associated with, usually associated with anxiety.
Right.
It's exactly what it kind of comes down to, right? It comes down to anxiety. It comes down to like there's a stressor causing this type of byproduct, which is a fear.
Yeah.
Right. Like that is something that kind of was like, man, well, let's go ahead and see if people are using it in a positive outlet, right? How are they utilizing? How are they looking at it? And I mean, I talked with one of my athletes about it. Sarah, we got in a really deep conversation about it. I talked with Chris about it. I talked about it with Savannah. I talked about a lot of people on this conversation about fear, and it was just really cool. It was really cool to open up my mind to really be able to kind of take in what everyone was thinking about, right? And like how they use it as their driver.
Yeah.
And someone told me, I forgot who it was, someone told me that like, it's not a driver, right? It's just an emotion. No, you're right. It is an emotion. Like, it's an emotion. It's an emotion, but what causes that emotion? Like what feelings are you feeling to cause this emotion? And some people were like, well, I'm afraid to jump off this airplane because that's what it is. So I'm going to go in and attack it and use that fear to take that step. Someone talked about not wanting to die, right? So they're going to go and do everything in their possibility to go ahead and do the small things right.
Yeah.
So that they're able to not have this fear overtake their life, and they actually use the power of fear in a positive realm. And kind of what I came down to was that if you can utilize it in a very micro manner, you're going to go ahead and see the macro aspect of it all actually move in the way you want to. Mm-hmm. And again, people have heard me talk about micro and macro, and I can use that in everything, but it goes back to the whole idea. And then our conversation yesterday when I was talking about like learning about a little bit more about the endurance aspect and really getting deep into like understanding it, but then realizing a lot of it just comes from everything else around the meat and potatoes, right? Just the details that we got to put into it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I was asking, kind of led me to understanding now. It's like, okay, cool. Like if we can do all the small things right, that fear is never going to become a negative at all.
Well, so I've thought a little bit about fear in the last year, and it is interesting with a negative connotation, but if you look at what it is, like at its very essence, it's an informational input. That's all it is. It's information. And so, when you look back at the most common probably way that I've heard it described is like when we were evolving, when we were still like hunter-gatherer types, and there was a lion behind a bush, when the bush moved, right, the person that wasn't scared of it, they didn't pass on their DNA, right? And so it's better to assume that, one of the best ways I've heard is like, it's better to assume that a tree branch on a trail is a snake than to assume a snake is a tree branch. Huh. And so the fear is like this evolutionary biological mechanism that's been put in place so that you survive.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to think about it in those terms, because sometimes we let fear, like, I'm scared of heights, for example, but I have a pretty good career jumping out of airplanes and helicopters. And when people hear that, they're like, wait, what? I remember when we hiked Zion up to Angel's Landing, I got down to the bottom and I was talking to Bonnie about it. And I was like, yeah, I'm actually scared of heights. And she's like, what? And I was like, yeah, like, I don't let it control my life. It's an input.
Yeah.
It's telling me, like, hey, just so you know, people could die up here.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, so for me, it's like, I literally look at it without any emotion tied to it. I just look at it as, okay, this is an information that's telling me that I should probably be extra careful. But through breathing techniques and through other things, like, you can control it,
Yeah.
The key is to not let it become too physiological, right?
Yes.
So it's like a psychological input, but then it creates a physiological response.
It does.
Which is based out of survival. And I think in order for us to make sure that it doesn't control our lives in the negative way, the negative connotation, what we really have to do is think about how to control the physiology of it all. And that's an interesting thing too, because it's almost like some of these things are happening implicitly. So, like, if you get exposed to something right now, if we were to just have a lion jump into this room, there's a lot of your physiological response that you don't have any control over, for good reason, because it's survival. It's like, you don't want to think about consciously, oh no, I need to get out of here. You want your body to just get the fuck out of there. So you want it to just react. And so it's interesting, like, we have to figure out, in order to put fear in the right place in our life, it's like we have to figure out ways of overcoming the response.
Yeah, and I think the other couple, like, so there was 3 key words that I really took from this whole conversation and what we had on Instagram, and it was self-awareness, acknowledgement, right, and capability. So avoiding self-doubt, right? Because when I look at self-doubt, what's associated with self-doubt? Most of the time, fear. Right? Like, there's some association, some kind of line drawn to the two.
Yep.
And if we can go ahead and be self-aware and acknowledge that we are fearful for something, right? But we also are now capable of not letting that fear drive us to do something.
Yeah.
It's kind of the way I took that from a lot of what I've gathered from everybody else.
Yeah.
It's like, man, that makes sense. Like, okay, cool. If you don't have the emotional intelligence to really understand, like, what that fear is doing and how you can utilize it, that's when we've lost, right? That's when you've lost control of that fear.
Yeah.
Now we can use fear as your example of the whole, there's a lion there, my body does A, B, C, and D, so I can go ahead and get out of here. Yeah. Right? Like, that is just a reaction due to a fear that I look at as, we know that is a danger.
Yeah.
Right? So we can go ahead and our body knows it's dangerous. All of a sudden now that danger becomes a life or death idea to us, right? Like, if I stay here, I might die.
Right.
But if I run, I have a possibility of living. So to be able to understand that the acknowledgement of it all and the self-awareness and being able to understand that you are capable of such things, even though the fears associated with it, you have to look at it also from a life or death situation.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we know if we're in a life or death situation, our body's going to react before we even are able to. But if we can be aware of that and have emotional intelligence, then we can actually decide and we can now make that decision in that life or death situation, because we have catered towards, again, the intuition, our lizard brain,
right.
All those things that are in the survival mechanisms are the defensive mechanisms that we go ahead and protrude as we have evolved over time.
Right. And so something to think about too, because I've written so much about the sort of adaptive unconscious that we all have in my new book. One of the things that's really interesting to think about is the fact that you have these, you mentioned your lizard brain or your limbic system, which is your in charge of the sort of fight or flight, as they call it. I would call it freeze, but that system that's in your body hasn't evolved, first of all. So that's one thing to know about it. Like, our prefrontal cortex has evolved. We've gained consciousness and the ability to judge our own actions and think in terms of morality and all these other depths to life. But the limbic system hasn't evolved at all. And so your brain stem, the function of a lizard, like that's why they call it the lizard brain, because that's about all lizards have for function. They either know like
danger
or not danger, basically. And so one thing to think about is the fact that the mechanism that's in place that's making you scared of whatever you're scared of hasn't evolved. The second thing to think about is the fact that when you have a physiological response to some kind of fear, it's so fast because it's out of survival, but the quickness of it makes it open to error, right? And so you have to be careful that you don't, like if you have a fear response for something, realize that your body is treating it as life or death because for survival it's had to, but the fact that it's such an implicit quick reaction means that actually might not be, and then that's when you have the option to like overcome it. Like I would say I do with heights. My body's like, oh fuck, this is like a place where people die. Mentally, because my prefrontal cortex is evolved, I can actually weigh the decision and be like, okay, well, I'm not going to die here. I just need to be careful. And then I need to like do some breathing to overcome the physiological response. But that's just a really interesting thing. I'm like way into fear. But I think that you just have to like take it with a grain of salt. Like you have these survival mechanisms for good reason, but you don't always have to listen to them. Like if you live out of survival mode, that's not a good way to live your life.
Yeah,
anyway.
There's not, right? And that's kind of, it's cool that you brought up the whole lizard and the animals. And we look at that, right? Because if you look at the animals in the wild, right? And I hate using this analogy and I hate using this because it's kind of the same way we are, but we've just became, like our homeostasis has evolved, right? Like our homeostasis evolved to our environment, right? Compared to someone, let's say we use like a dog, for example, right? Like, they lived in the wild, they would be adapted to the wild, right? We have a dog who lives inside an apartment who's adapted to that. Will they be able to handle living out in the wild with that environment? And a lot of times you look at that and it's no, right? And it kind of goes through the whole idea too of this evolution of like, we look at technology, right? Like they're like, well, the reason why this athlete's this much better is because of the development of technology. You're right. Does it mean that they changed them from working harder?
Right.
No. Like they're probably working just as hard. They're just using technology now in a way to make them work harder, to recover better, to do these things. And I kind of put that in association now with the idea of like evolving from then to now. And we are now just setting up our own baseline to what we understand that danger is and how we associate what fear is going to go ahead and help us and drive, right? And creating those life or death situations, right? Like, and I heard today, I was listening to a podcast with, Candace Burt. She runs, Candace Burt, but her new podcast she just put out, she did a podcast with a guy named Brian, I don't know his last name, Brian, I forgot, it's on my phone, Brian Pascal, I have to look it up, I'll look it up in a minute, and he said the best, he's like, we should be writing our obituary every single day, right? Like we should be putting ourselves in this life or death situation so that we are creating this growth in who we are. Because if we're not, then we're not really doing anything, right? And when you go and talk about a lizard or the lizard brain was at least challenged in a fearful, danger way at least multiple times throughout the day, right? Again, we're not in that realm anymore, and that's why you said like, hey, living in survival mode, like it's gonna kill you.
Yeah. We
now have that control to mitigate, like, okay, cool, what's danger and what's not. The more we go ahead and put ourselves in uncomfortable positions, ends up lowering that idea of what danger is, and it helps us become more resilient and durable to when we are put into a situation of life or death.
Right.
It's kind of the way I look at it. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's, it's really interesting because we don't know necessarily, like, we don't understand fear that well at all. And so there's a lot of research going around, like Dr. Huberman and the stuff that he's doing up at Stanford with Brian McKenzie's been working with him. That was the reason they went cage diving. So I listened to them give a talk on this.
Okay.
And so they went down to Mexico and they went cage diving for a couple days. And then after the second or third day, when they got more comfortable, they actually got out of the cage. And there's only a few places that'll allow you to get out of the cage. And the what's really interesting is they went through all these breathing techniques. Of course, that's why Brian McKenzie's involved, because he's like working on this breath protocol and stuff. So they go through these breathing techniques in order to keep their physiology at baseline, in order to not allow the fear to spike their limbic system. So what's super interesting to me is that, so they told this story. They're down in the water and they're swimming around with these sharks, and all of a sudden the sharks just start like flipping super fast, and their tails are like whipping, and they're like kind of being all herky and jerky, and all of a sudden the instructor, like guy that's down there from Mexico, looks around and he like tells him go to the top. So everybody goes up to the surface and he was like, hey, who the fuck is freaking out right now? And they were like, what? He's like, which one of you is scared? And this guy's like, I am. And he's like, get the fuck in the boat, you're gonna get everybody killed. And so it's super wild. The reason they're using sharks is because sharks can sense that fear, like, which is just so wild to try to wrap your mind around. The fact that animals can sense an emotion based on energy, fucking nuts. But right, like that's crazy if you really think about it. But that aside, like, it's just super interesting. We don't know that much, but what we do know is that you actually do have the ability to control your fear response.
And that kind of goes, and this is where I'm going to play devil's advocate, because we keep going to this idea of like the breath work and stuff, and you see me, I've been all about it, and as of recently, it's kind of...
Seems like you're not lately.
No, I'm not, dude.
Yeah.
And you know why? Because of the fact that, like, this is going to sound really cliche, but the fact of that, how many people are trying to jump on this bandwagon of breathing,
Right.
and have no fucking clue what they're doing or why they're doing it. Like, I get it. Brian McKenzie and Rob Wilson and all those guys are doing it. Like I said, I've talked to them, learned from them. Like, yes, they're doing it. They're pushing their own stuff. But what I see the problem there with the whole breathing aspect is the fact that people are only doing it just because it's some kind of trend right now.
Yeah.
Right? And will it make a difference down the road for some people? Yes. But is it hurting some people? Yes, it is as well, because people are not educated on enough. They don't want to take the time to be educated on enough. What Brian McKenzie and those guys are still learning to this day, and they're throwing everything out to you as stuff they've learned previously. Yeah. And by that time, it's going to continue evolving. But I've gotten into more of the idea of now of like, because now there's so much stuff with the psychology aspect with school and learning how powerful the mind can be, and how you can control it. It's kind of led me to this: is what if it comes down to this? What if the individuals that were there in that situation had just adapted so well to that environment to be able to handle being in the ocean without the cage in that situation.
So you're saying it was just from being comfortable?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, that is a good point.
I'm bringing that point up, right? What if it was just because they got to the point where they continue they push that threshold to where finally it's like, okay, I can relax. Now, is the breathing the end all be all and why that happened? No, it was just a piece of the puzzle that helped them control their heart rate, right? And we kind of go to this emotional connection of like whatever the individual is, right? Like you end up creating baselines in an environment like that. Yeah, is kind of the way I look at that, right? And the heart's beating when you're underwater, right? You hear that, the heart's beating. I feel like that kind of stuff is what associates to the shark to understand what's going on, sending out these waves, right? Sound waves. That's kind of the way I look at that. Mm-hmm. And again, I could be completely way the fuck off.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know either. But
right.
This is just a theory in my head, right? Like from understanding how the brain works and understanding what the heart does and understanding sound waves from music and how those things work. What if it's just a sound wave through the water of your heart just beating? Yeah. Right? Doing that. So when it increases, it now changes the baseline of the environment. Mm-hmm. So yes, the breathing work comes into play now because what do you get to do now? You get to control your heart rate. Right. Right? But the thing is though, is like that guy just wasn't exposed long enough in that environment to be able to utilize the breath work in the proper manner is what I'm getting to. Mm-hmm. Brian McKenzie and those guys, they've been doing breath work for how long? Right. You know what I'm saying? I don't know who the other guy was or how long he's been doing breath work. But those are questions I would like to know to see if my theory or my thought on this is someone in the right direction. Yeah. Right? Was this individual, how long has he been doing breath work? Right? How long, like, what is his idea of fear and danger? What is his idea of life and death?
Well, I think a 12-pound shark will...
But that's what I'm saying, though, right? Like, so that's what I'm saying. What are people's experiences prior to going into that experience to be able to handle that environment? Do you see what I'm saying now?
Yeah, okay.
So what I'm trying to get to is, like, what prior experiences and what prior environments help shape this mind to go ahead and go into this environment to be able to get it situated and create this baseline homeostasis to be able to get out of the cage and be around these sharks with utilizing breath work as a tool. Yeah. Right?
Well, that's all I think the point is that... It's a tool to, I mean, because if you think what you're saying, like the elevated heart rate, that's a physiological response that's happening because of the input. Right, because of the input. So breath work definitely does help I mean, just tell somebody who is starting to hyperventilate to take slow, deep breaths.
Yeah.
Their heart rate will come down.
Yeah.
So just as a tool for dealing with acute responses to fear, I would say it's pretty beneficial. And I think that's even without the breathing research. Like, for years we've known, like, that was a whole breathe in a paper bag thing, right?
Yeah.
Like,
but what I'm trying to get to though is right there is like what I'm trying to get to is the point of like multiple different environments and exposures and experiences have been able to shape this mind of these people to be able to put themselves in the situation, which 100%, right? But some of the people, like I said, the guy who got scared obviously wasn't able to handle that kind of stress because his environment, his exposures leading up to it hadn't been enough to go ahead and get these guys in there, if that makes sense. Like, I'm trying to, like, I don't know how to word it, man. Fuck.
yeah, well, I understand. I mean, because they've been conditioned.
Exactly. It's just a condition, right?
Yeah,
They've been conditioning however long to be able to go and do this, right? They've been conditioning through breath work to go ahead and go do this. Was it just that individual who was freaking out and was just not conditioned enough to handle that environment at that time and moment?
Yeah.
That's kind of where I'm going now. Like, thank you. That was the word I was looking for.
Right.
Like, yeah, is it conditioned enough? And that, because then it's like, well, all right, let's go ahead and put me and you in that situation. Would I be able to keep my heart rate down during that? Probably not.
Right.
I'd be straight up, right? Like, that's fucking scary, bro. Like,
yeah, I want to do it. I want to, like, be able to master that.
Yeah, right? Like, be able to do that. That's impressive.
Yeah.
Right? But it also comes from just the understanding of, like, well, how conditioned has your mind been to be able to go into that environment like that? And then from there, to be able to condition yourself to utilize your breath work while at the bottom of the boat with these sharks while this is happening.
Yeah.
Some people are just not. And it goes back to the whole breathing aspect of, like, people are utilizing this breath work, but they're not conditioned enough to understand how to utilize it properly to get the most out of it.
Right.
You know, and they're just doing things. So again, it's just one of those things where I look at that all.
Yeah, no. And so, all right, so this is interesting because there's a dichotomy that we're sort of talking about. Like, one is the fear as an acute response to something that's in the environment, and that's largely why survival becomes a thing. And that is a function of the limbic system. But when you look at fear as in the fear of, like, I would say one of the biggest motivators for all people who listen to this, who want to be high performers, who are athletes, like anybody, the fear of being average is super strong.
Yeah.
And that is, I would say, much more of a psychological, you know, I don't want to say problem, but like
it's something that everyone's working through.
Psychosomatic disorder, not disorder even, but you know what I'm saying?
It's a cycle that people are working through.
Yeah.
It's not a disorder. It's just something that everyone works through just because of the fact that I believe that everyone wants to try and be better than everyone else, right?
Sure.
They never want to be better than who they are.
Right.
We hear that all the time, right?
Well, that's why the idea that we can compare ourselves to others, that's why we have it, because we are always mapping the world out, and we want to make sure, like, in comparison to other people, where am I? Like, because it tells you where you are in the world and in your tribe, right? And so, and so in a lot of ways, that's survival too. But I think that the big thing that we have to, you know, just probably that's worth discussing for the people that would listen to this is, how do you keep fear in the right place? Like, that fear of being average, it's like, that's a hell of a motivator. It can also wreck your fucking life, because you can end up working out, you know, like, essentially, like, whatever you're going after, you can end up placing that above all the other aspects of what makes you human.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's interesting because just like fear as an acute response, well, fear as in the, like, fear of something, especially in the context that we're talking about, it's, you got to figure out a way to keep it in the right place. You don't want it to be driving all of your actions.
Yeah.
Because then you're going to end up somewhere shitty, I think.
And that's where, again, I go back to, like, how do I keep that there? Well, for instance, we'll go ahead and we'll use, like, I signed up for the Tahoe 200 this year. For 2019, that's my A race.
Did you sign up?
Oh, I'm signed up. Ready to rock and roll.
Official?
Oh, it's official. I'm signed up, posted and everything. Everyone saw it.
Cool.
You know the first thing that popped in my head when I thought about that race was the fear of not finishing it.
Right.
The fear of not finishing it, and then the fear of letting people down who are going to support me through this time period.
And you want to keep that fear. Like, that's a good thing.
But that turns into a motivator.
Yeah.
Right? And the reason why I want to use this as an analogy is because I got done the 100-mile race in the past however many weeks I haven't been racing, I haven't had a fear for anything, really. I haven't put myself in a fearful position to kind of, like, feel super motivated.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. We can say it's complacency, right? Like I just was getting complacent, and I want to use fear, not let me get complacent. Some people use other things to do it. Well, I like to utilize fear, not to let me get comfortable. And I've learned that about myself over time. I need to put myself in fearful positions so that I continue growing, right? And I kind of look back at the years back, like, how did I continue growing and evolving through these time periods in the military? It's like, I was being put in positions that I needed to pass, the schoolhouse at BRC. I needed to pass free fall school. I needed to pass this. I needed to pass SEER. I needed to pass this. I need to do all these courses. I need to pass them. And then the byproduct of being fearful why I wanted to pass was not, one, to be like black sheep of the community, right?
Yeah, of course.
It wasn't because I wanted to prove something to myself. It wasn't that at all, right? Like, I had no idea if I could do it or not, but all I knew was I'm going to use this fear of not failing this school to get me through it. And if that happens, it happens, then obviously I'm capable of doing it.
Right.
And after a time period while I'm going through that school or going through that process, I learned that I am capable of doing this.
Yeah.
And now once I learn that I am capable of doing something, I just create this internal, like this internal motivator for myself that now I can utilize the external motivators now to just kind of keep me going further sometimes when I need to get that extra step in or whatever else, compared to when I started and that was my main driver. Yeah. Right? Through the slow process of it, I ended up finding the real reason why I wanted to do it. Right? I haven't found that reason yet for Tahoe 200. I haven't. All I know is I'm afraid of failing. Yeah. I'm afraid of not completing it. So why did I sign up for it? Because it makes me uncomfortable. Well, guess what? It also makes me start doing all the small things right. Yeah. By doing the small things right, that means I sleep better. I eat better. Make sure I'm hydrating. I'm taking care of my body better. I'm trying to manage all the stressors of my life to be as balanced as possible so that I can put forth the effort everywhere while I'm doing while I'm chasing such a goal. Yeah. But while I'm chasing this goal, I'm not letting that fear take over my main purpose, because I have another fear associated to my main purpose, which that fear is a lot greater than the fear of Tahoe 200. But when I'm inside that Tahoe 200, I'm going to use that main fear of my main purpose to get me through whenever I need to. Right? And I guess that could be the definition of finding oneself. Yeah. Right? Right. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tool. I mean, so that's the same reason that I like to add a charity component to my events, honestly, because I'm like, there's no fucking way I can take people's money and then tell them I failed. And so that fear, it gets so elevated and it makes it so real. I mean, when I ran Tahoe last year, it was, I had raised a bunch of money for the Heroes Project. And I'm like, I'd been telling my friends and family for months that I'm going to do this race, and they're donating their money and believing and supporting me. So fuck yeah, the fear of failing, that thing was so strong that there was no that fear was so strong that there was no obstacle actually that would have stopped it. And the same thing when I was going through selection, like you mentioned, it's like the fucking fear of going and telling my friends and family that I failed was like so strong that there was essentially nothing besides death that was going to stop me from getting that thing.
We literally put failure in a life or death situation. Right. Literally is what we did.
Yeah, like you put it in the context of your brain. That's what you make it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. It's funny, as I told myself when I started running Kodiak, when the race started, I put myself in the mindset of being chased by the Taliban.
Yeah. Yeah, but you probably ran too hard then.
That was at nighttime.
Oh.
Yeah, so I did run a little too hard. Everyone knows the story about that, but I put my mindset into that. I might have exaggerated a little too much. Right. But I was like, all right, I'm eating from one point to the next point. That means I'm eating from my crew. I need to get back to my next crew. I was like, that's the dark side I need to get to. There's an area of retrieval for those guys who don't know. And I needed to go ahead and get there as quick as possible because I'm being chased by somebody. Yeah. And it led me in a negative. It hurt me for a little bit, right? But then when I got back to when I put the fear of not being chased by somebody, but being fear of letting people down, it changed my performance. Yeah. So it kind of goes back to that same idea, man, where I really truly believe that to be able to use fear in a powerful and a positive realm, you have to utilize that in a life or death position, in the mindset of it, right? Because again, and we keep saying that, like, the only thing that keeps going, we're just fear of failing. We put whatever context word, fear, I'm fearful of X. Yeah. we have now put that in the mindset of like, okay, is this going to be a life or death situation type of context? Or are we going to go ahead and just be like, well, it really doesn't matter. I can be fear of it. I'm going to leave it alone, not even worry about it. Like it's way far over here. Or am I actually going to reach out and grab it and bring it towards me? And then I go ahead and work towards it.
Right.
You know? And I think that's what I got a lot of people's responses was that. People were admitting to like, yes, I'm fear for this, but I'm grabbing it and pulling it towards me so I can approach it and I can fucking get rid of it.
Yeah.
And then the next thing that comes around that's fearful, let me grab it, bring it closer to me, work through it, right? It's this like never-ending circle of us evolving. And that's kind of where I took it. Like, all right, we need fear to evolve.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. It's kind of like that old cliche, this is on every motivational YouTube video ever, but it's like that idea that when you want to succeed as badly as you want to breathe, then you will be successful, right? Like that's the thing. Well, that's what it's saying. Like, that is true. Like when you make success the only option. Yeah. Because you can equate fear to death or whatever you want, but when you make it your only option, it's that there's no other option. Like that's what people don't understand. Like when I say that, I'm like, it really does work that way. Like when I was going through Tahoe, I'm like, there is no other option. There is death, or I'm going to fucking finish. Like, there is no other option.
Like, I'm gonna die on this trail,
right?
Like, or I'm finishing it.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing me stopping at the next aid station saying I quit. Like, that wasn't the option.
No, that was, I'd way rather die.
Yeah.
And so I think that in the context of that, though, it's like, so for people listening to this, like, so what have you done? What have you taken on that's so damn powerful that you're willing to go there mentally?
Yeah.
You know?
And it's crazy, man. I think, and again, it goes back to like, I'm not telling someone to go out there and run an ultra marathon.
No,
not at all. Like, it's not meant for everybody. I'll tell you that for a fact. Like, it takes a special individual, and that's something that I've learned over the past year and year. If you think about it, I've only been running ultras for a year. Yeah. And it's done so much for me so far, but I won't tell someone who does, like, but go out there and be okay with putting yourself in a and does it have to be a realistic life or death situation? Like, no, but you can look at it as like that and be like, okay, cool, I'm gonna go ahead and take the next step in, like, I want to go ahead and bungee jump, right? But I'm afraid of heights. Grab that you're afraid of heights and take it and go live life by bungee jumping, and go ahead and use that fear to see what it drives and see what it like really does to your system. Yeah. Right? Like you talk about the lizard brain, like, cool. Let me go ahead and put that fear into play and let me see what kind of like reaction my body has to it. Right. I actually might enjoy it.
Yeah. And I'm at that point, I get intrigued by my own reaction sometimes. You know, like I stumbled up on a huge fucking snake in Australia. And I was like, I jumped back, but then I thought like, oh man, this is crazy. Because I'm like processing, I'm like realizing like, because I had been writing so much on the limbic system in my new book, and I was like, damn, I'm like watching myself, like what's happening?
Go through all the steps.
Yeah, go through the steps. And you're like, that's super interesting. And, you know, I don't think everyone needs to run an ultra either, but I do think that everyone needs to have something that they're that passionate about. And I think your life's going to be real fucking boring if you don't, you know?
But we talk about that all the time, though, right? Like, it's funny. It's like we've been doing these shows like crazy, and it's kind of cool that we've been able to have not the same conversation, right? Even though we're always about it. So it goes back to that idea, right? It's like, all right, cool. Well, like the same idea. Like, let's go ahead and write your obituary for the day. Like, what do you what craziness are you getting yourself into? You know, like, all right, I'm gonna go for a run today and put myself in that position. Like I told you before the show started, like I got to run today, and I felt like I was flowing with the trails of nature's around me. Like I felt like it was this like powerful like zen coming from nature while I was running, and it made me feel alive, right? But I guarantee you, if I hadn't signed up for Tahoe 200, I wouldn't have felt that. Right? Yeah. And why did I sign up for Tahoe 200? Because I'm fear of not completing it. I also want to see my full potential. Like, what can I do? What am I capable of? Yeah. Right? So now I'm acknowledging it. I'm utilizing, knowing that am I capable of it? I'm still in that, and I'm still using that fear to figure out, am I capable of it? Because I haven't gotten to that point yet in my training or even in my life yet, in that moment to be like, all right, I am capable of doing it. Am I using that like not that self-doubt right now? Or because there's not self-doubt, but there's just a question. I'm not using it as a negative aspect. I'm using it as a positive motivator to put me in places that I wouldn't be able to experience if I didn't put myself in this position. Right? That's it. Yeah. Right? Like I didn't go out and run a fucking hard run today. I ran for, easy run, but I was able to, enjoy what I was doing. I was present. But a byproduct of me signing up to Tahoe 200 is the fear, and that fear has helped me be acknowledgeable and understand the self-awareness, and it's getting me in that realm of believing and I'm capable of doing something, right? And then from there, I was able to have this motivation of this happy endorphin rush of flowing with the trails while I'm running today and like feeling really good and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Again, I wouldn't be able to be on that place in that position if it wasn't for me signing for Tahoe 200.
All right, so that's the perfect. So we're gonna issue the first LionHeart Radio SideShow challenge. Go sign up for that thing that you're fucking scared of. Right now.
Like, yeah.
Sign up and let us know.
Sign up for it.
Find that thing that you're scared of, that you know is going to force you to level up and to grow and to change and to do all the shit that you don't want to do. You know, like the thing that's going to not allow you to go home and jerk off at 2 o'clock and waste your fucking life away that way. Like, think about these things that are going to force you to do all of the things that you know you need to do. And go sign up for it. Thanks for listening to LionHeart Radio. I hope that the information from today's show will make you fitter, happier, and healthier. For the show notes of this episode and every episode, head to www.lionheartrad.io. Yep, just like LionHeart Radio. And please, if you have the time, head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps us to know that we're on the right track in delivering you reliable information and value. As always, feedback is welcomed. If you have any comments on the show or would like to suggest a guest, send me an email at rick@luavive.com. That's LUAVIVE.com. Thanks for your support, and we will see you next time.
Bitch, I feel good. Don't I look stupendous? My shine is so endless, and shit you can do to end this. Even when I'm dead, niggas still gon' bump that chip shit. Coke, white, Escalade on cinches for you dipshit. So you won't forget this. Midwest nigga be the coldest. Cleveland.